Our speaker today, you all know him, is the president-elect of our club, is Steve Buie. Steve is here with several of his colleagues to talk about Success4RKids, which is a nonprofit that was formed with the express purpose of working with schools to equip school-age children with the necessary strong foundational cognitive learning skills. And Success4RKids is currently conducting a pilot program with the I Promise School to help 10 students become skilled and confident readers. And the results of their cognitive skills training are life-changing. So with that, please join me in welcoming Steve Buie and his colleagues to talk to us today. So Steve, take it away.
Hey, thank you, Pat. I appreciate that introduction. And it's a real pleasure to be with you all this afternoon and to share about the nonprofit that I actually formed to impact grade school students by, as Pat shared, by equipping them with solid, necessary foundational cognitive brain skills. Now, I said a lot there, but we're going to unpack that as we get going. And as I get started, I'd like to actually thank a few people for helping me to get my nonprofit established. First and foremost, I want to thank Mark Crone as my attorney, Tom Knauer for developing our logo, John Margita for accounting and business planning, and I would be remiss if I didn't remember our late beloved Graham Renke as an encourager and a former board member. And Graham is deeply missed. What a tremendous man and a tremendous Rotarian. Additionally, I want to swing back towards Mark Crone. I want to make another comment. Because of the many relational connections he made for me, that actually helped to lead to a number of fruitful meetings with the I Promise School that allowed us to get this pilot going. So this last fall, we actually started working with 10 students at the IPS school in a pilot program to train and equip them with solid foundational learning skills, with our emphasis really focusing in on reading. And reading, as most of you may know, has been in a mess in the world of education, and it's not because of our teachers. By and large, teachers are incredible people who are deeply committed and frankly, quite overworked. It's the system right now that is limping along and really needs a major overhaul. Today, you're going to learn the vital importance of cognitive skills brain training and its effect on how we learn. So fasten your seatbelts. We're going to be covering a lot of ground today, and hopefully at the end, we'll be able to answer your questions. For starters, I know the positive effects of this training because of the amazing transformation my younger son went through in his training. He left an IEP, better known as an individual education plan, far behind after he went through his training, and he graduated from CBCA with a GPA just shy of 3.2. And by the way, CBCA's academic standards are very, very challenging. So my wife and I are extremely proud of how he was able to do as well as he did. It was this transformation that led me as a client in the process of his transformation to ask a number of questions when he was going through brain training. And all of those questions seemed to center around this one particular question. Why is this critical, life-changing training not in our schools, especially with the needs that our kids have? Never in my wildest dreams, though, could I imagine that our positive family experience would actually lead me to buying the business known as LearningRx. And I became a new business owner just over 7 years ago. And when I came in, I came with the express goal of bringing this crucial training to our schools. Thus, the creation of Success4RKids, a vehicle to provide sustainable answers to meet critical learning needs. Now, our work is somewhat unique in that we deal in the realm of neuroplasticity of the brain. And what that simply means is this, is that our brains are malleable and they can be trained and they can be improved, and quite significantly. Whether you realize it or not, your brain is an organ that functions as a muscle, and it most significantly resembles a muscle in that it functions as a use it or lose it device. These wonderful brains we've been given, they only stay fit when we make a concerted effort to keep them fit. So let's take your memory as an example. There's no such thing as a good memory or even a bad memory. There's only a trained memory or an untrained memory. And as you work your brain, it will continually form new neural pathways and keep your established neural pathways open. This process helps make learning much, much easier. Success for Our Kids uses all of the LearningRx materials with our students to focus skills training on meeting each child's, now listen to this, specific learning needs. And LearningRx has been in the world of cognitive skills brain training for over 20 years. And by the way, all of the exercises that we do, they're actually non-academic, which means it's fun for the kids and they buy in much easier. I'd like to take the next couple of minutes and just share with you how we learn by looking together at the learning model diagram. So bear with me as I bring this up. Is that on your screen now? Can everybody see that? Are you able to
Yes,
see
we
that,
can,
folks?
Steve.
Okay. So this diagram is a wonderful word picture of how anybody learns. And you can see all the circles with the gear and the filing cabinet, and they are the two major components of the diagram. I personally refer to the green and the purple circles in the gear as the engine of how we learn. And the knowledge bank or the filing cabinet is a wonderful picture of all of the what's that we learn. Now, let's say that when you are in school, or if you have a child that's in school and they're struggling. Well, if they were struggling and you were in a parent-teacher conference, they might say to you, Steve, your son, we think he needs help in math and in history. And we think, therefore, that he needs a tutor. Well, a tutor would stand to the right of that filing cabinet, reach in and grab the math and history and reteach it, and hope that this time my son would understand those a lot better and be able to do better on his tests and such. Now, that's not a bad way to approach a learning struggle if the battle is surrounding information. However, over 80% of the struggles of learning have nothing to do with information, and they have everything to do with skills. So when you see those circles and you see the green ones, which are active automatic processing, and the purple ones, which are higher thinking, how that information, the quality of it ends up in that filing cabinet is completely dependent on how those skills are exercised. So, for instance, you've got your attention, your working memory, and your processing speed, which is automatic. And if you can't focus, it's going to be really hard for you to learn and to draw on your working memory and to make use of it and to process it. Now, anytime and every time something new is learned, you have to go up into these higher level skills, these higher thinking skills, and use your logic and reasoning, your long-term memory, your auditory processing, and visual processing. And when these skills have been trained and honed and they're synchronized, then the type of information that's going to end up in that knowledge bank is going to be pretty darn solid. But if a child is struggling in one or two or more of these areas, then what ends up in that knowledge bank could look a lot like Swiss cheese. Now, a couple of final things, and then I'm going to pass it over to Andrew Durr here in a second. But these particular skills, these necessary foundational skills, are not teachable. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is they do not need more information. They need to be strengthened and built up, similar to someone going to a gymnasium and working on building muscle. And so where Success for Our Kids specializes is in the area of building skill through training. And training is far, far different than just simply teaching and going over information. It allows that teaching to hold. It allows that teaching to be made use of. And so that's what we've been doing, and we've been focusing in on the reading program. And now I'm going to pass it over to Andrew, and Andrew's going to share a little bit with you about some of what we're doing.
Thank you, Steve. I'm Andrew Durr. I'm the Assistant Director of Trainers for Success for Kids. And I'm here to kind of talk to you a little bit about our metrics that we use in order to track these things, as far as, showing the growth throughout the training program. So Steve, if you want to throw up our first little screen share, it's going to be showing the breakdown of the Woodcock-Johnson assessment test. There are dozens of different tests out there. This is a very popular, common one that is used to measure certain skills that the students would be using. So this is actually one of our highest marked students that we worked with during our first couple months with the IPS school. As you see that it's broken down into a bunch of different subcategories, but if we're looking at the main ones, those would fall into the category of long-term memory, working memory, logic and reasoning, visual processing, as well as auditory processing and word attack. So all of these are a good way of kind of breaking down how one individual skill can kind of, affect the others. And it's very important to be well-rounded, because as Steve was speaking to before, it really just takes one or two low-hanging fruit to sabotage the overall ability of a student. So if you're talking about somebody who has very high marks in the working memory, but has poor attention skills, that's kind of a null and void result because they cancel each other out. So it's very important to understand how these skills intertwine with each other. And the Woodcock is a great test to do at the very beginning of all of our training and also done at the end, so you can see the growth. And Steve already touched on the term of neuroplasticity, showing that basically it can be affected simply by practice and effort. That's not anything new as far as how we think about how our muscles grow, but it is the exact same principles that we use when it comes to our cognitive functioning. If you want to go ahead, Steve, and show what I'm going to be teaching you guys today, this is going to be our connection between our visual processing as well as our long-term memory and logic and reasoning. Because metacognition is essentially a fancy way of saying knowing how to learn, or knowing, thinking about thinking. Knowing how you work allows you to be efficient with your expenditure of energy. So if you have a young person who is easily frustrated and they do not absorb it the first time, it is incredibly difficult to keep them on that task. But if you present the information in a way that is more comprehensible to them, all of a sudden then it is stored away properly, and it's not just the classic memorization regurgitation that I was kind of shown back when in my schooling. So when you're talking about names are one of the trickiest things for our brain to hold on to for long-term memory, because there's no basis or reference for them. If you don't know that person, it's hard for your brain to hold on to it. But through through our different phonetic sound-alikes and these images that you're about to see, you can actually create a tangential connection between each one of these names. And when we share this, it's just a kind of a wacky little bit of cartoons that they have that show each of the presidents of the United States, but they're shown in a picture form that allows people to use the phonetics of the image as opposed to simply trying to remember the name. So Steve, are we, is that shared up here? All right, so believe it or not, guys, what you are looking at here are the first 20 presidents of the United States. They have all of them in the bottom portion as well, but we are going to try to learn the first 10. Now, average short-term and long-term memory can hold about 9 to 12 items, give or take. But if you remember them in a very particular way using your visual memory, all of a sudden it allows for a lot more efficacy when it comes to long-term retrieval. So here's what I'm talking about when I'm referring to the phonetic sound-alikes. So I'll give you the same rundown as I normally do with my students, no matter their age. If you're looking at the guy at the very beginning there, he is watching a 1-ton weight being held over his head. And I'd be kind of nervous too. That's a lot of weight. So that is Washington for President Washington. Now, in order to have the strength to lift the 1-ton weight, this woman next to him has to have superpowers. And she gets her superpowers from the atom on her head for President Adams. All right. So then Adams is patting her son on this head, who is dressed as a chef. Chef, her son, for President Jefferson. And if you notice, all of these are physically connected to the next because it allows you to go one to the next, but it also allows you to go backwards through that information as well. We'll touch on that a little later. So we're going to Chef, her son. He's grilling up a pretty mad looking son for President Madison. And then we look at the man who is on the wave of that sun, and that is Monroe. He's got the oars in his hands, he's doing the action and everything. So that's President Monroe. Now, if you notice, he's got a little 5 on his hat because he's our 5th president. So these little visual cues allow to bring the attention to those little details, allow you to kind of start and stop in a way that a lot of these other memory techniques would not allow for. And it keeps the energy and attention of the student regardless of the age. Again, we work with very young and very old, depending on who's in need of the program, but the science is the same no matter who. So if we continue on from the or of our Monroe, it's another Adams. So it's not the same Adams, it's actually his son, but it's the same name, so the same image. Now, you'd be surprised how many of our younger students recognize the thing that is coming flying out of the atom as those jacks. So those jacks are hitting the sun to represent President Jackson. And now Jackson, he's a son, he's getting heated up. So he's starting to melt the tires on our van, chasing the bear who's decided to run for Van Bear Run, Van Buren. Again, that's going to be showing the visual representation of the name itself, because again, Van Buren is not a very common thing for somebody to try to hold on to. So it gives them a basis to refer to. Now, if we're looking at what that bear is running into, it's a very hairy sun for President Harrison. Now, again, if you notice that Harrison, he's stacking down and handing down tiles to our President Tyler. So that would be our 10th. All these lines are broken up into segments, so that way people can, again, pick out where they are in the line. And it gives them a mile marker to better and more efficiently work their way through that information. It's a lot of repetition that would be able to, do the names on their own. But when you're talking about using the visual representation, it stands out in your memory in a totally unique way. And the best part about it is that it actually allows you to go in reverse through that information. So if you're trying to do this, you can take that same image and work your way by saying, okay, so there was a pile of tiles for our Tyler. We were having that handed down by Harry's son for Harrison, Van Buren, Jackson, Adams, to Monroe, Madison, Jefferson, Adams, and Washington. Now, again, this is something that we do day one with our students. And that's about 5 to 10 minutes of work, depending on the attention level of our student. But again, the best part about it is that it's a little bit silly. And silly things have a tendency to stand out to us, whether we're a kid or an adult. And these are the ways that we can really focus on the need to have all of these things work together, because this is using visual processing in order to help improve our long-term memory. None of these skills exist in a vacuum. They are all dependent on the others, and without one, the other skills can actually be negatively affected considerably, so much so that you would actually show a low mark in something that you're actually kind of proficient with. So again, the Woodcock does a great job of breaking down all of those little skills, and it shows you a great before and after picture of how all of these skills work in tandem. So you can bring up those high marks, but at the same time, if you bring up those low ones, it multiplies out that skill set. And it's just so important to have everything be well-rounded, because if you have one or two areas of deficiencies, as Steve was speaking to, it can sabotage your learning as a whole. And it's very important to understand how those work together. Visual processing is also a critical component when it comes to our reading. Being able to see, visualize, and understand is something that is an absolute critical component and the backbone of our program, and is a large component of what we were doing with the IPS students. So I'll go ahead and turn this over to Sue, who's going to be working your brains as far as the auditory goes, and we can work our way through the some of our reading program.
Okay, glad to be here today. I'm going to share with you a little bit about our ReadRx program, and it is a sound to code program that is unmatched by any other program that's out there. In a faster time, we get the best results from doing the sound to code, and it's the way the English language actually works. So the ReadRx is what it's doing. It's strengthening the auditory processing part of the brain. So Andrew was referring to different cognitive skills, and auditory processing for those that can't read well, or we may diagnose that as dyslexia, which simply means struggles with reading, that is just talking about within that part of the brain, the connections or the neural pathways, like Steve alluded to, are all tangled. And we can see that in MRI imaging for the dyslexic reader. And so what we do is we're working with trying to make new neural pathways for them for the auditory processing. And auditory processing is basically understanding in a word how many sounds there are, the differences between the sounds, and the order of the sounds in that word. So you and I, when we look at a word, those of us that are all readers, when we look at a word, we see the sounds, we see the letters, we know the sounds, and the information is going into our brain, and then in the auditory processing part, we are able to say that word. But for somebody who is dyslexic, they see the same word that you do. They most of the time they know all their sounds, but it goes in and then how it comes back out is not the same. So sometimes they mix up the order of the sounds, or they put random letters into words, like the word might be bat and they might say brat. So they put usually L's and R's into words that don't even exist there. So what we do when we're working with them with the ReadRx is we are doing a series of intense repetitive drills that are working on segmenting, targeting, dropping sounds, replacing sounds, and actually writing down the word and writing and saying the sounds as they write the word. So all those drills over and over again, you start to see the growth of a student being able to read 2-letter words and then maybe 3-letter words. And, there's just a step-by-step how it goes through that whole program. So we begin by introducing only 17 of the 43 sounds in the English language, so as not to overwhelm them with too much all at once. Because sometimes some of the students, like I've had a 19-year-old, and that's just one example, but they could not read the word J-E-T, jet. So when I'm starting with somebody like that, you're starting with 2-letter sounds, 2-letter words, and it takes time. Over time, then it starts to come together. And because there's new neural pathways that are growing in their brain in that area for them to be able to do that. We also use nonsense words so that they may come to us as an older person, maybe a 5th or 6th grader, and they already have some words memorized. So we want to make sure that they are actually decoding words and not just having those words memorized. So once they're proficient with all those basic sounds that we start with, then we go into 2-letter sounds like SH, CH, OI, and OY, and long vowel sounds. And then from there, that's kind of the foundation that they need to be able to read. And from that part, the last part of the program, which is really cool, is called complex code, where we talk about there's many sounds that you can spell it many different ways in the English language, unfortunately, makes our language difficult at times. So for example, the A sound can be spelled A-E as in the word cake, or AI as in the word train, or A as in baby, or EIGH as in sleigh. There's many others too. But what we do is, just like Andrew showed you that picture, we have a picture of a large cake with a train that goes around the bottom of it. So the next layer would be a baby on it, and then at the top there's a sleigh. So they memorize that picture, and it gives them the memory of like, oh, I see an AI in the word. I remember the train on the cake, so it must have the A sound. So that's kind of a help for them with their spelling, because obviously with somebody who's dyslexic or struggles with reading, spelling is definitely an issue too as well. So Andrew is going to be my student for me today. And I'm really just going to go very short, but I'm going to just kind of show you 3 different drills, so you just get an idea of how we do this. So he's going to have his metronome on 108. Very good. The metronome is key to everything that we do, because it develops like an automaticity. Like, can you say your math facts down a column of numbers slowly, or can you say them every other beat, which is 1 second, meaning that it's really automatically in your long-term memory there, that you have that you have that skill developed. So we're going to work on one where you're just reading words. And I want Andrew, I want you to start on page 21 at the very bottom. And we're going to start with that BRI word. And I want you to just read down the column of the words for me, please.
Okay.
On every other beat.
So is this going to be our FRE one? Are we talking about?
Oh yeah, let's do FRE.
Yeah,
Do
let's
column 2. That's good.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
All right. It's all right. Just want to make sure if I'm the student, I want to know what's going on.
That's right. Let's start there. Okay, go ahead.
Right. So FRE, CRA, SNIT, SLAT, TRI, BLAH.
Blend it. Whoop. Go back to that TRI word and blend it for me.
I.
Yep. Say it 5 times.
Trit, 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 trit.
Go up 2 words and go down.
SNIT, SLAT, TRIT, BLAH, PLAT, FLIT, DRA, SMA.
So you see with that drill, when we're working on reading words, like he did a very nice job of that, by the way. Thank you very much, Andrew. So sometimes the student is not going to go, they might be every other word. So I might just have to say, okay, let's just take it off the beat for a second and let's start going down that column of words and see how we can do that. But I'm giving him immediate feedback, which is a key thing of what we do in training, so that they know it's a mistake. And then I'm asking them to correct it 5 times. Doesn't mean that the next time they go down that word that they're not going to say it the wrong way again, but we just do it over and over again. And that repetition is what is beginning to create those new neural pathways. So we're going to go to another drill. And this one, Andrew, he is going to use a card that looks like this. So there's vowels here. And so it's the I, a, and ah. And what he's going to do with those vowel sounds is I'm going to say a word, and he's going to replace that word with all those different vowel sounds. So this is like analyzing the word. So if I said nab, Andrew, what would you say?
Nib, neb, nab, nub, knob.
Kip.
Kip, kep, cap, cup, cop.
Lap.
Lip, lep, lap, lup, lop.
So that's how that one goes. And believe it or not, it sounds like it's an easy one, but it can be a train wreck for most people that we're working with where reading is an issue.
And the reason why we don't have it in the A-E-I-O-U order, as most people are recognizing, is if you look at the phonetics of what you're actually doing with those vowels, is that it starts with a small increment of ah. So again, it's building that musculature of understanding how to properly fill that sound. If anyone's a music nerd, they also understand that you have to properly form your jaw in order to get the right sound out. So it's important to really focus on that.
No, that's a good point. And vowel sounds are usually the trickiest sounds to learn and differentiate between them. So the last drill I'm going to show is where I'm going to say a word. For example, if I said the word ipped and I asked Andrew to drop the last sound, he would tell me ip. But if I said ipped and dropped the second sound, he would tell me it. Okay, so let's do a few of those. Ready? Last. Good. Ist, second.
It.
Int, last.
In.
Eft, second.
At.
Good. So that's kind of how that drill goes. So I just wanted to give you that, just an idea of what training looks like. I know it was just a tiny snippet there. But I just want to end by saying that about 2 years ago, LearningRx reached their 100,000 mark nationwide. And what that meant was that 100,000 clients, students that have gone through the LearningRx program were assessed and then post-tested, that they saw significant improvement and results. And that's just a huge number to think that that many students have been helped. And we here in Akron doing that LearningRx, we see that amazing transformation, just what Steve was talking about, his son, Andrew. And it takes place because we do this one-on-one training, which is developing that relationship with the student. I know all their negative behaviors or some of their bad habits. You can almost, like Andrew will agree with me, that sometimes you almost feel like you can see inside their brain what they're thinking before they actually say something. So we're able to help them with doing these drills. We're their cheerleader. They get little tiny steps of improvement and we make them tell us those improvements because it's important. And then when they see that they work really hard on something and maybe it's where they're stuck, and they've worked on it day after day after day, and they're a little frustrated, but all of a sudden it's like the light bulb comes on because the connections are there. And then they are so excited about that. We celebrate that, and you start to see their confidence and their willingness to persevere and be motivated and taking ownership of these, things of working hard with us, which is awesome to see that happen. Because when they first come to us, they're kind of like a little bit slumped over. They just kind of have that look on their face like, oh, what is this going to do to help me? Not really sure about what it's going to do. And when we get to those places where it's hard and we're pushing hard, they're not too happy about that. But when they start to see the improvements, they are totally excited. The beautiful thing about what happens to them is that they begin to believe in themselves, and then they're able to pursue their dreams. Because when you don't believe in yourself, as well as I do, they're not going to achieve their goals. So I just want to share with you one testimony of a student that I worked with. This was a few years ago. He was a first grader just getting ready to go into second grade. And we worked, and he was extremely bright and was extremely dyslexic. And so the sounds, like he could not push sounds together to save his life. And the letters that he would mix up the order of the words, like he might say split when the word is spilt. So we just drilled. And I know there were times when he would say, Steve will laugh, but he confessed later that when he first would come to the room, he would say, I called it the door of doom, because he knew, like, I was going to work him hard on the read. We did the think, but he was so bright in the think areas that I didn't need to spend a lot of time on that. But the read is what was crippling him. So about a year after we finished the program, he took a standardized test, and at the end, and his mom texted me, or actually they called me on the phone, and he's telling me he got a 95% on the language arts portion of the test. Now, I would have been happy with like 70% or 65%, because even after you finish the program, it's about practicing the reading out loud so that you get that down. So the fact that he was able to get a 95% was just amazing to me. So I know that when we worked at the I Promise School, we only had 6 weeks, like Steve talked, because of the COVID restrictions. But what we heard from the administrator there is that the parents were already seeing improvements in their kids. And we were just scratching the surface, which to me, like, I was just amazed by that. So I just want to say, as a former teacher, I used to teach in Cleveland Heights a while back, but more recently in Maple Heights, which is near the city of Cleveland there on the border. My heart has always been to help those kids who fall through the cracks. They're in a classroom of 25 or 30. I was teaching high school, 9th, 10th grade, and they're reading at a 3rd grade or 5th grade reading level. And so they're struggling because even though they might have some bright thinking skills, they're struggling because they can't read. And I actually had a student one time tell me, he said, Mrs. Costello, he said, I should sue the school system. And I said, what do you mean? He says, because I'm a senior, I'm about to graduate, and they failed to teach me to read. And so I looked at him and I said, you should, because you're right. They didn't do their job. And it's because they didn't have the tools and the way to help them develop that auditory processing. So my hope along with Steve and Andrew is that we can bring this program into the Akron schools and let the Akron I Promise School be the beginning of change for all these kids. I want it for every single one of them in our Akron schools.
Thank
So
you.
Steve, if you want to take it from here.
Yeah, I'm just going to wrap up very quickly, and then we'll open up for any questions. But let me say this. This is just a very brief overview, but I hope you've been able to see and experience a little bit of what we're about. And I can honestly say that this is the best of science and art blended together. And we keep extensive records on every one of our students. You saw what a sample of the Woodcock-Johnson test looks like, and Andrew mentioned we do a before and after. But above and beyond that, we have what looks like almost like medical records that we know at any given moment where a kid is in the development of their short-term memory, their logic and reasoning, their auditory processing, their long-term memory, their executive processing. We can be that precise to know where they are in the midst of the journey. And 2 statistics I would share with you. In looking to get into the I Promise School, we came very, very close to doing another pilot program with an inner city private school. And the principal shared 2 statistics with me that staggered my mind. And she said, of the 220 students we have in our school, 86% of them are being raised in single parent family homes. 86%. And she then went on to say, and if that's not staggering enough, Steve, 91% of these students are living at the poverty level or below. So I hope you can see that by the life-changing experience that my family experienced, and when I came in to take over and purchase LearningRx and then form Success4RKids, it was with the exclusive purpose of getting this where it needs to go. Because with the deepest, and I don't mean this to sound weird or proud, but with deep thanksgiving, we know how to crack the code. And by the way, they're very much aware of what's going on there at the I Promise School. In fact, they recognize that in the short time that they have to work with the kids, if they're not able to crack their codes, they have a term that they use as a pathway to prison. And so this is the real deal, and we're committed to getting to it where it needs to go. And I am naive enough to believe that in our great city of Akron, Ohio, we have the ability to come up with innovative ideas that can literally change the world. So with that, we'll put it out there for questions.
Steve, Andrew, and Sue, thank you very much for sharing. Are there any questions? Looks like
Yeah,
Dr. Rob just chatted in. Yes, go
Yeah, I
ahead,
have one
David.
here in the chat. Dr. Rob's asking, the individual cases sound remarkable. How does your overall data show success rate? What % of kids move forward, and do the results stick, say, after 5 years?
Yes, and in fact, we actually have some very, very good literature. I've got a magazine which is in PDF form I can send out to you and to anyone else who would like to see it, because we are extensively doing deep research and peer reviews, and that would allow you to see what the efficacy is of this, Rob, and for anybody else who's interested. But this is the real McCoy.
If you don't mind, so again, this would technically be another testimonial, but I myself actually went through the training as a student. I was older than the students we were training through IPS, but I did a version of the ACT before the training, and then I took it afterwards, and it was enough of a bump to get me into the college of my choice, my dream school that I was drooling over. And my issues were a lot of dyslexic tendencies, ADHD. Basically, sitting down for an extended period of time to do a test was my kryptonite. And so this essentially, again, it just, since it's not subject-based material, you know, you're not learning about geometry or geography, you are instead, again, learning yourself and how to properly retain the information, teaches you the skill. Because then all of a sudden I went to college 500 miles away and I was on my own, and I didn't sink, I floated, because I was able to, again, use the skills that I had developed through that training indefinitely. Because it's not just trivia-based knowledge, it's much more about how can I better attack this issue in this class that is struggling for me? How can I use the skills at my disposal in order to, you know, I find success for myself? So the extended success kind of comes by proxy of the type of material we're teaching. So, and that's another big difference between tutoring and training, is that the longevity of the gains is considerable.
Great. Another question, how has COVID-19 impacted the face-to-face learning training with your center?
Andrew, why don't you give a very short response?
Yeah, well, so again, I was very, very much on the face-to-face, you know, bandwagon. Like, that was what I had done as a student. That's what I had been doing my entire time as a trainer. So I wasn't incredibly keen on going into the online. But I've had several students that have started online and finished fully online and been blown away by the consistency of result. And so again, that just, if nothing else, shows that when the material is kept to, the results are kind of a given.
Very good. One more question here. How difficult is it to pivot from teaching young students, say in first to third grade, versus high school students?
Let me comment on that real quickly. It's not hard at all. In fact, I'm big on word pictures, and if we're able to catch these kids when they're little, if we can catch them at between kindergarten and third grade, I'm going to make a bold statement that will hold true. We can cut IEPs in half easily, if not 70%, cut them down, because you're giving them the necessary skills right out of the gates. Now, when we start talking about older kids, so you get a kid like Sue was talking about, who's getting ready to graduate from high school, doesn't know how to read. We get kids like that all the time, and it's almost like a train is out there on the tracks. You got to bring it back in, and you have got to do repairs on it so it can go back out on the pathway of life and be successful. But we have a 40-year-old young man who's coming here now that is a perfect example of what she described. And his mother moved across Cleveland to get him into the best school district, and no one could help him. But you know what? We are, and his life is being transformed and will be transformed because we know what to do. And as Sue said, it's one piece at a time. And as those come together, it's awesome to watch the transformation take place.
We're almost out of time here. Just, I think Katie Miller has one question or comment she'd like to add here?
I do, Steve. I'm real glad. I'm thrilled that you're in with the I Promise School because, as most of you know, Tim being on the school board, the I Promise School is looked at as the model for best practices that the other schools that can then start instituting across the whole school system. So they're considering the I Promise School like throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And what's sticking is what then they're going to take and then mold into education policies and going farther into the other grades. So you're really well placed. And I think it's a fantastic way of doing it. And starting in that very difficult situation with those kids really makes it easier then to take it out to the bigger public school system.
No, thank you, Katie.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic point, because that was my original destination, and try as I could, I couldn't get in there. And frankly, my forehead should be bloodied for all of the times I knocked
Right.
on doors and tried to get us into a pilot program. And then, as Providence would have it, the door swung open through Scott Scarborough, former president at the University of Akron, who was on the board at the I Promise School. And Mark introduced me to him, Mark Crone. Everything went well, and then they're glad to have us. And Katie, to your point, this much we know. We have a certain gentleman in this city who is known across the world for his basketball prowess, but that man is so much more than basketball. And if this does take root there, it has the ability of affecting not just Akron schools, but schools everywhere. And the bottom line is this, is when any of us can have skills, and you have those skills and you know how to use them, then by golly, you can do anything. And so thank you for your time today. Very much appreciated.
Great. Steve, as you know, if you can stick around, I think we'll stay on for another 10 minutes or so. Matt, back to you.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for your questions and for the engagement. With that, we will conclude our meeting. Our speaker next week is Tiffany Roper of Eat, Speak, Love, LLC. And we have a few birthdays and anniversaries. Birthdays, Pat Weimer is today on March 30th. Sandy Narragon, April 3rd. And Rima Mwakasa, April 5th. So happy early birthdays to everybody. And anniversaries, Katie Miller celebrating 6 years. Scott Colligan is also celebrating 6 years. And Stu Buchanan on April 1st, 38 years. So happy anniversary, happy early birthdays, everybody. Thank you to all of our speakers and for everybody participating today. So it's great to see all of you, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day and week. Bye-bye.
Okay. Steve and company, I just wanted to thank you. It was a great presentation. I have a grandson who was dyslexic, and his mother intervened and actually joined a resource group in Anchorage, Alaska, and has been serving at the national level of an organization for dyslexia. But anyway, that grandson is a graduate of Gonzaga University and is now an electrical engineer. So intervention is very important. But I do have a question. And this was brought to me by one of my doctoral students who was from Kansas and worked with kids who were migrant children of migrant workers. And one of the drawings that a child kept, missing on a kindergarten readiness test was a pizza. She was instead, this little girl was always circling the flour as the thing that she would eat. And because of that and other things, she failed that test. So my question is, how do you deal with kids from other cultures who may not recognize the particular, symbols that you're using as meaning something specific? Because, we understand that, you know, being from the same culture, but if you grow up eating the fruit of a cactus and instead of a pizza for lunch, what do you do?
Well, we actually have our program that is in about 25 different countries with the parent company, not with Success4RKids. LearningRx is in about 25 different countries, and they are addressing culturally through culturally relevant approaches. So that's how that is done.
Yeah, but this would be in our own country because the kids here, any of the English language learners, you know, may have different ideas about, you know.
Well, they may, but honestly though too, Susan, what you saw today, you saw the president's list, and we actually have all 40, 45, 46 presidents there. So you can take a look at it, and that could be a challenge. But other than that, most everything else really transfers over well. We have a young boy who's been going through the reading program, and he's raised in a home where his parents speak an African tongue predominantly, and so English has been his second language. But he's doing very, very well in going through that process.
Okay. Well, it was nice to see what you do. I've always been, you know, interested, and now I have a much better idea. So thank you.
You are welcome. Any other questions?
Well, Steve, I think it would be interesting. I just found out in the class I'm teaching at the university this semester, I've got a student that I was failing the class. I knew I had to make some accessibility, but what I didn't learn is with online classes, he has a very extreme learning disability, both from a reading and writing standpoint. And they had talked about having a note taker for him, but a note taker on an online class doesn't do any good. So now it's a matter of trying to read with the Office of Accessibility to see. Unfortunately, I wish he would have reached out to me more earlier in the semester. But it's clearly, I mean, even when I saw the emails he was sending me, the spelling was atrocious, and the whole structure. But having now talked to the Office of Accessibility, I was thinking, had I known this to the degree of his disability, and he would have potentially reached out to me, I could have converted a lot of my presentations to audio as well, and not just PowerPoint that he really was struggling with. So, and I think he's a recovering person, so he's got all sorts of things in his life that have been a struggle. So now I've got to try to see if I can maybe get him to take an incomplete to give him the opportunity then to get somebody in there that can actually read his PowerPoints and read the textbook, et cetera. I mean, I don't know how he's been even trying to read the textbook. So it's like,
Wow.
I know. I just want to share, like, I know that sometimes students can get, they can get like an IEP in college even, because I had a cousin whose daughter was on an IEP that they would read the test questions to her, you know. But the thing is, once you graduate from college and you move out, there's always going to be some level of reading in any job that you're in, and who's going to read that for you all the time, you know? So to not have that reading down is just, it just hurts those people that are out there, you know, struggling.
right, right.
Steve, do you partner with other dyslexia centers around the area?
No.
Okay.
No, we're not partnering with them. However, we do work with the state of Ohio with the John Peterson scholarship, which allows families, if their child is either being homeschooled or they're paying to have them in a private school, they can make use of that scholarship and bring their student here excuse me, for us to train them.
Okay. Oh, I asked because, as you know, my husband's a Mason, and he's in Scottish Rite, and they have the Dyslexia Center in Canton. So I just wondered if you were capable of partnering with those centers to, work in tandem.
I will tell you something that is really exciting for me is that on the board of Success for Our Kids, I have a woman who actually contacted me about 5 years ago. She's an incredible nun out of the Toledo area. Her name is Sister Marsha Kaiser, and she has for 25 years been on the board of the Ohio Dyslexia Association. And she found out about our programs through a sister nun who was using this in an after-school program down in New Orleans. Well, here's what's funny. That sister nun was sister-in-law to the woman I bought the business from here in Akron. So all these dots, no pun intended, connected. And this dear sister Marsha contacted me, came out, witnessed what was going on. We went to dinner and all that. We've become, very, very good friends. But here's what she says. Of all the programs that she's seen, as far as like reading focused programs that are intervention related, she said, there is no one that holds a candle or a torch to what you do. You guys are the top. And it's because of this holistic approach of coming at strengthening the skills, because when you have the skills, you can interface with the learning. And see, this is what's so nice to watch with the kids is to watch them get it, because the light comes on, the confidence goes up, and all of a sudden they enjoy learning.
Mm-hmm. No, I grew up with a speech impediment, so I can relate to some of what you were doing. It was very good. Great presentation.
Thank you.